Welcome. Welcome all to Gun Violence Awareness Forum. Listen to us as we tell our story. On behalf of my community's Keeper Mentor Group, in collaboration with the College of Charleston and multiple other gun violence organizations, we first want to thank the College of Charleston for allowing us to tell our stories, to broadcasting and being such an amazing partner in the fight against gun violence. My name is Keith Smalls, the founder and executive director of my community's Keeper Mentor Group, and I will be hosting this event, which is a one of two night event. As a host of this event and the executive director and founder of my community's Keeper Mentor Group, my position here is that I am also a survivor of gun violence. So, as a host and also a survivor of gun violence, I would be the first to tell my story. And in telling my story, and all those who will be telling their story, uh, you will definitely recognize the hurt, the pain, the raw emotion, and the severe seriousness of this tragedy and how it affects, those who's been affected by gun violence. As I said, my name is Keith Smalls. Uh, I am a gun violence survivor. I am the father of Amari Khalif Roper Smalls. Amari was my son. Uh, and as I tell a story, I guess again for maybe the 50th time, it's never easy. Um, October 26, 2016, my 17-year-old son Amari Khalif Roper Smalls was murdered by a 15-year-old. I can go back to the day when I received a phone call from my youngest daughter while I was at work saying that Amari was dead. Uh, and that's how the phone call came. I didn't believe it, didn't think it was true, but I had to respect that it was coming from her and she was crying in hysteria. So I took a moment from my job and called in hopes that, of course, this wasn't true. And I was actually told that it wasn't, that it wasn't Amari, it was someone else who had gotten shot. So I called my daughter back and I told her, it's not Amari, everything is fine. It's Mari is all right, because that was what I was told and believed. Um, I left my job at the time on Beach Ferry where I was working, and I was also going to try the technical college and then the main campus downtown. I believe that's the main campus. Um, and I went straight to school, night school. I was there. Went through my class as it's normal. Um, didn't really think about it so much because I was sure that what I had heard was not true, and I was sure that what I had heard confirming that it was not true was not true. Class proceeded. It was over. I left. Walked. I wasn't walking, and I went to the bus stop. Uh, it's nighttime now. I received a phone call from my daughter around 2:30, 3 o'clock. At this time, it was around 7 o'clock at night. I'm sitting at the bus stop and I get a phone call. Another young lady who happens to be the first lady that I called after I was told by my daughter that my son was dead. This time it was her. And she was crying. And she was telling me she's sorry. She thought it wasn't Amari, but it is. So as I stood at the bus stop, not knowing what to believe, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go, oh, not knowing anything, the first thing was for me to get there. I got on the city bus, rode the bus, called a friend, explained in short terms what I had heard, and this friend came and picked me up en route. I got to the area in which I was told to come and in which they said that it happened. And at that moment, it was something almost like out of a movie. And then it was the reality of what movies show you and tell you that's not true, comparably to what reality tells you is true. Um, And that reality is that, you don't just walk up to a body if there's a body, and you don't just get to look at the body sitting there like it's done on TV and NCIS and so many different crime shows. I sat there and I waited a while uh, until the coroner came, and that story will continue to on as this night uh, goes on. And it was confirmed that my 17-year-old son Amari was indeed dead. Um, that moment was a moment that changed my life forever. Uh, I have to deal with the death of my 17-year-old son every day. October 26, 2016, as we are here, March 24th, 2021, still tragedy of epic proportion. The death of my 17-year-old son changed my life in multiple ways. It affected the community in multiple ways. Shortly thereafter, the murder of my son, I would say a day or two later, it was confirmed that the officers and how they solved my son's crime was because first, the story of my son's shooting was publicized on social media, Facebook, on a timeline. In a conversation, it was said that Amari had been shot. And it was three teenage girls who were in this conversation um, who acknowledged that they lived nearby where my son was shot and decided that they would go and see for themselves. And they went there and they seen my son laying there. Three teenage girls. And instead of going to a neighbor, a parent, law enforcement, they took the story back to social media to confirm what was true, that my son was indeed murdered. Um, and shortly thereafter, that a press conference that I attended, where the NAACP, the National Action Network, and other local organizations gathered because due to my son's murder, there was said to be retaliation, and they would be closing on a game that would be coming up that would attend North Charleston against Stoll, or Garrett Academy against North Charleston. So, this tragedy of epic proportion, you know, a 15-year-old who murdered my son had a 17-year-old accomplice. So I lost my son's life, and you would typically say that these young kids lost their lives as well, but that didn't necessarily happen. There's so much more that I can tell you about the story of my son, Amari Khalif Roper Smalls, his death, and the days afterwards. That story has been told and will continue to be told. But in losing my son, I gained I would like to say, an ability to fight back. Like some of my friends here, comrades and advocates in the fight against gun violence, we, like myself, I think like them, we just ask, for more support. I always say that I'd rather have more people who support us in fighting gun violence than people who stand by us as survivors of gun violence. My name is Keith Smalls, the founder of My Community's Keeper Mentor Group, and a survivor of gun violence. And my son name is Amari Khalif Roper Smalls. And telling my story, I hope that we shed light on gun violence, on this terrible, terrible place in our society. And we all come together in hopes of being able to combat it, fight it, kill the disease, kill the culture of gun violence. And that's how I will end my story tonight, but it will continue on. I thank you all for being here. I thank you all for listening. As we move on to others who have lost their lives, lost loved ones to gun violence, we, we just ask you all to listen with an open ear and an open heart. And I understand that there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of tragedy here in these stories. And we go on to our next speaker, our next guest. Her name is Tisa Wack. She is a native of Charleston, South Carolina. She is the mother of one son, Tyrell Miles, her only son. And she will definitely tell her story of her son. She's also the founder of an organization called We Are Their Voices, a gun violence advocacy group. And she's also a member of Moms Demand Action. And so much more Tisa does. We'll let her tell about her story of her son and share some more of her work in the community. Tisa, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate this forum that you're putting on. I think Jennifer and the College of Charleston for allowing us to give us a platform to be able to share our stories. Like he said, my name is Tisa Wack, and I'm a native of Somerville, South Carolina. And I'm a mother, a sister, an aunt, a friend, and I'm a community advocate. And I am a survivor of gun violence. My son and only child, Tyrell, he had such a bright future ahead of him. Tyrell was smart, athletic, very handsome, humorous, and had the most amazing smile. That's one of the things that I miss about him the most, looking at that smile every day. He was a husband, married to his high school sweetheart, and a father of their 2-year-old son. But like us, his wife and child changed forever on the evening of November 30th, 2015, when a detective and a coroner showed up at our house. They told us that there was a shooting, and tragically, Tyrell did not survive. He was only 23 years old. This was my baby, my only child, a young man who was thriving with so much ahead of him. He was shot and killed along with one of his friends, 21-year-old. And I remember telling myself, this could not be happening to me. Life couldn't be so cruel. I had just lost my mother in January 2015, unexpectedly to complications due to diabetes. In November, I lose my son. I was mad at the world. I couldn't, life could be so cruel. And being transparent, I was even angry at God because I couldn't believe the two most important people in my life just gone in a blink of an eye. I remember the night after the coroner left, the house was filled with people as the news trickled down throughout the community. And I remember my sisters, have two sisters, not wanting to leave me in the house by myself. Leave me by my side. I was surrounded by several people, but I remember just as they dozed off, sneaking off to my closet, my bedroom closet, walk-in closet, and I fell asleep on the floor, probably just for a few, because it was the darkest and quietest place. And I felt as though if I stayed in that closet, that I would not have to face the reality that if I woke up, that maybe this was a dream. You know, it takes me back to that night often when I share my story, and sometimes it's really difficult, but I feel as though if I can share my story, then maybe I can tug the hearts of some people to change their mindset, the mindset of how they handle conflict, how they handle people. Do they think about the people who are left behind when such senseless things happen in the community? This week has been really awfully hard, and I'm sure it has been for a lot of the other survivors on the phone tonight. Listening at the Atlanta shootings, listening at the shootings in Colorado this week right here, it brings back a scar or a wound, and you feel like you're suffering from PSTD, because it really is. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. It's bringing back a trauma. Now you're thinking about the knock on the door that those families got. That's the same knock that we got on our door, the same news that we got, the same devastating, this can't be true. And I look on the news and I hear the prayers and the concerns being offered, but we live in a community that, yes, prayers are definitely wanted and prayers are needed, but action needs to happen as well. If we all stand together, then we can make a difference. Our voices have to be louder than some of the ones who think that we want to take guns away and control guns. It's not that. It's about being safe and being responsible and making sure that weapons aren't in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. You know, I miss my son every day, and I think about his son growing up without him. Because see, one thing I failed to tell you in the beginning of my story is that my grandson, who was 2 at the time, he turned 3 4 days after his dad died. So in the midst of planning a funeral, we were trying to plan a birthday party because of course this 2-year old turning 3 didn't know that the reality of his father wasn't coming back. He just thought his dad went to the store. Where's my dad? Where's my dad? He was that kid that, you know, most new mothers, they try to get a break from the kid because they always add them the little fingers underneath the toes as they use the bathroom. They can't get away. But that was my son to my grandson. His wife didn't have to lift a finger. She took care of him. He bathed him. He nurtured him. It was devastating, you know, having to just put a note on the front door to say we're not taking visitors at this time. We're gonna just go to Monkey Joe's and actually try to give my grandson a sense of normalcy, because in just a few days he'll be saying his last goodbyes to his father. You know, it's still dealing with the sudden death, you know, of my mother. It was tragic, and I just thought it couldn't be happening to me. And through community, a few years later, through community, I wanted to stay in that dark closet, but I finally came to a realization that if I stayed in the closet, then Tyrell's life would have been taken in vain. So I chose to be Tyrell's voice because it was taken, and so many other people due to gun violence. So I became active with my local Moms Demand Action chapter. I saw them on a couple of things, and I kept peeping in there. I met a mutual friend who's lost her son in the same neighborhood, 2 blocks away from where my son was killed, about a year apart. Her name is Chandra Bryant, and we always talked. She reached out to me shortly after my son died because she just kind of felt the pain. She lost her only son as well, Shaquille. And the thing that I remember most about her is we would always chat, and she would say, we have to be the voices of our children. So as we talked more and more, we realized that we had much more to offer the community as far as our advocacy. And we created a nonprofit called We Are Their Voices, which brings awareness to the effects of gun violence and how it affects not just the people like me who was directly impacted, but it affects the whole community. And we offer support as far as grief support. Matter of fact, we have a grief support meeting tonight right after this live. But I transformed my anger into action. And like I said, I co-founded a nonprofit, We Are Their Voices, that brings awareness to the effects of gun violence. I joined my local Moms Demand Action chapter, where I first volunteered as a community outreach lead, and now I serve as the South Carolina deputy chapter lead for every town, and a survivor fellow, where I go across the country and I tell my story about Tyrell, and I do this in order to make an impact and make a change. Um, I decided to speak up as Tyrell's mom because his voice was taken. We can't continue to sit around as these senseless acts of violence continue to go on. We have to not accept this as a new normal. You know, I asked the listeners here that, I think a lot of us try to find out where we can fit in. There's many local organizations that are doing work across the low country. You got Keith, my mentor's keeper. You have Butch Kennedy and Lisa Kennedy with Tri-County Gun Violence Coalition. And it's so many more that I can name. But I say get involved, because the last thing you want to do is be that headline on the news. Because one thing, the local news tells the story, they're reported as it's written. But when the channel turns off, we don't get to turn it off because we have these feelings and emotions each time. And we may seem brave to many that we're able to speak up, but it's not brave at all. I think it keeps us moving. It gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a way to honor our children. So, I ask anybody who's listening and who's compassionate, who has children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, to get involved and not wait until something happens to your loved one, but get involved now. Create those programs, donate to those organizations that are doing the work in the community. You know, there's so much time. I always tell people, you may not have the money to contribute, but your time and your talent is just as worthy as a dollar. So, you know, get involved. For me, I can ask you to do this. You can text honor to 64433. And when you text that, you'll be connected to an organization that give you ways to help in this fight for this senseless gun violence to end. You know, again, I thank Jennifer, I thank the College of Charleston, I thank Keith and my mentor's keeper for allowing me to speak about my son. And if you don't remember anything else about me, just remember that my son's name was Tyrell Miles. And he was my only son, and he meant the world to me. I miss him every day. I miss his smile. I miss his laughter. I miss him watching his son grow up. So if you want to honor him. And I thank you.
Thank you, Tisa. Thank you so very much for sharing your story. Definitely one thing that I, would add to that, and something that you say a little about how we watch what's been going on lately in Colorado and Atlanta. And I think something that is something that we typically, I don't think I hear it, but I see it, where we don't necessarily find people taking this as serious as they could or they should until it happens to them. That's unfortunate. That's why we are here telling our stories. We don't want you to wait until it happens to you for you to take this fight serious. With that being said, we're going to go on to our next guest, our next speaker. This young lady's story is definitely a story of survival. She is a survivor of gun violence, but of a different tale. And I will let her tell it for herself. Her name is Chantel Mitchell. She is a Charleston native, oldest of 5 siblings. She experienced childhood trauma and violence at a young age. I can't speak for her. Of course, she will speak for herself, but I doubt that she anticipated that that would become some form of a norm in her life, that it would follow her, down the line as she became an adult. Chantel Mitchell, thank you for joining us. Please share with us your story.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. And I do appreciate this opportunity. But like he said, my name is Chantel Mitchell. I am a domestic violence victor / survivor. I am the oldest of 5 children. I have 4 siblings under me. I am a mother. I'm a best friend. I am a cousin. I am a girlfriend. But most importantly, I am a domestic violence survivor. I experienced domestic violence twice in my life. Just like he said, it started when I was a child. Me and my siblings, we experienced childhood trauma through a violent upbringing. And when that happened, I didn't realize that set the environment, that set the tone for what was to come to me. And what I experienced was mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, you name it, I experienced it. It wasn't until at the age of 35 when I was dating my youngest son's father that I experienced physical abuse to the 10th power. I experienced a year of fighting, a year of emotional abuse. But when I decided to leave, it wasn't until my oldest son, who was 10 at the time, who told me, Mom, if you're staying because you need someone to help you raise the baby, we can move to Columbia and we'll help you raise the baby. That's when I knew that I couldn't be silent no more. I could not keep this away from my family members. It was time for me to break this off. When I decided to break it off, that's not what he wanted. On May 24th, 2014, as I was walking down my stairs to go to work, he was hiding, waiting for me. He came from up under the steps and he cocked the gun and he put it to the middle of my forehead. And I stood there. At that moment, I'm looking down the barrel of a revolver. And all I could say to myself was, this is what someone's last moments feel like, looking down the barrel of this gun. And this is the end. But my children were upstairs. So I said, God, I cannot let my kids come outside and find me with a bullet in the middle of my forehead. So as I went to swipe the gun from out of my forehead, either the gun went off or he pulled the trigger. God was with me that day. His angels were with me that day because I'm here talking to you all. I experienced a busted nose, bullet fragments around my left eye, and my hearing was out for several minutes. At that moment, because the gun was so close to me, I thought I was alive on adrenaline. And I literally felt like I was living my last few moments of my life. And as he looks at me, I said, oh my gosh, you shot me. He said, no, I didn't shoot you. And he put the gun back to my head. And that's when my children ran outside and they started screaming, please don't shoot my mom again. Please don't shoot my mom again. And that's when he walked off. It was that moment when I said to myself, like, how did I get here? Why I allow myself to be here? And how close to death I was. When the emergency personnel came on scene, the shock on their face, they just couldn't believe. I didn't know what they were looking at. They just couldn't believe until the EMS personnel told me, he said, ma'am, I don't think you know how lucky you are. And I don't want to say lucky, I want to say blessed. That event and that situation not only affected me and my children, but it affected my friends. It affected my family members because nobody knew what was going on. All they knew was that Chantel was shot. So for hours, my family is at the hospital not knowing anything. They're just in panic mode. But as I went through that, we ended up losing our place. The apartment complex put me and my children out, even though it was not my fault. They said because of the incident, I lost my place. Me and my children were homeless. We stayed with people for about 6 months, but it's that feeling of feeling like you're intruding on someone else's space, or you don't really feel that 100% welcoming. And you're just sitting in a car driving around with 5 little kids. And you're asking yourself, God, why me? As much as I help people, as much as I pray, as much as I love people, why am I here? But I went through that so I can be a voice for the women and the men who lost their voice due to gun violence. And upon research, when I think about gun violence and domestic violence, I came across a site called the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. And it says that firearms contribute significantly to domestic violence, whether if they're using it to threaten them, to kill, or to control them. Also, in the US, about 4.5 million women is threatened by a gun, and 1 million is either shot or have been shot at. A woman is 5 times more likely to be murdered by her abuser when he has access to a gun. And to reduce the number of domestic violence homicides, we must ensure that the people who abuse their partners do not have access to firearms. And the only way that can happen is if we change the laws. And that's the only way we have to advocate. This is why I decided to not let my story just be a story that my family know about, but I decide to speak about it. And in 2019, I walked into motivational speaking, and it's platforms like this and the opportunity that is given to me that I make sure that I voice my story, I give my story, but I also decide to use my platform as such as social media. And I created my I Got You Friend, which is my podcast that will be coming in June, which I speak about a various of topics such as domestic violence, childhood trauma, sexual assault, anything, you name it. The things that we are silent about, the things that we don't want to talk about is what I'm talking about. And I didn't know where to start, but I figured the only way to start is to start. So it's to connect with individuals like Mr. Keith and Professor Baker, who's giving me this opportunity to speak. I'm inspired. I'm inspired by the stories that I've heard so far. I just want you to know that I am a voice, and I would like to definitely get out here and advocate just as hard as everyone else, so we can bring awareness to what the silence, the gun violence, and what it's doing to our community, to our homes, to our families. So I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. It's been a blessing and a pleasure. Thank you. And I'm Chantel.
Thank you, Chantel Mitchell, for telling your story. Thank you for being brave enough to tell your story, for being a voice for those who are not able to speak because they are no longer here, or being a voice for those who are afraid to speak who are here. Thank you so much. We support you. We invite you on this journey as we fight gun violence and this terrible, terrible plague that has find a sense of normalcy in our community and our lives. Um, we anticipate that we will hear more from you. We look forward to hearing more from you and seeing you even more. Um, Again, we thank you for coming on, and we will continue the conversation as we get closer to the end. If there's anything else that you want to share, but we definitely want to go on to our next guest. Um, this amazing woman is a woman who I consider a comrade. She's definitely someone who has been in the battlefield a while. Um, she's a friend. She's a fighter. She is a one of a soldier. Um, Her name is Vanessa Hayden. She's a driven community activist, um, a passionate advocate for gun violence. She lost her son, William Tinsley Hayard, 1998, and her voice hasn't gone silent since. In fact, his name hasn't gone unnoticed. She continues to fight for him, and we invite her. We thank her for coming on. We give her a moment so she can tell her story. Thank you, Vanessa, for coming on.
Thank you, Keith and Jennifer. William Townsley Halyard. We affectionately called him Tansy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tansy. As a toddler, he never met a mud puddle that he didn't like. It took our entire family to wrangle that energy, very rambunctious as a child. He wore Buster Brown shoes until one day he told me, he said, "Mommy, those are baby shoes. I don't want to wear them anymore." So Mommy stopped putting the baby shoes on him. He was in the gifted student program from elementary school through high school. He made me very proud. He also received the ROTC scholarship, academic scholarship, and attended South Carolina State University. He always wanted to be a South Carolina State Bulldog. We have a history of South Carolina State alumni in our family, and that was always his dreams. He had his plans for his future all laid out from the time he was in junior high school, and those plans, they never wavered. September 17th came. He called me that afternoon and he said, "Mommy," he said, "I'm to graduate December 10th, and then I'm to be commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army on the 11th. I was jumping for joy, and I was telling him that we have to plan parties, family get-togethers. I had all of these plans and I was just rattling them off. Then he told me, he said, "I think I'm coming home." He had a 1-year-old daughter at the time. And he said, "I'm gonna come home and then we'll go pick up Chelsea tomorrow," which would have been September 18th. So I said, "Well, I'll be looking for you." September 18th, the wee hours of the morning, I think it was about 1 o'clock. I received a call that he was shot and in the hospital in Orangeburg. I rushed and got dressed And as I was driving to Orangeburg, I was praying that I could be there before he went into surgery. And I also wondered who could have done this to my child. Once I arrived in Orangeburg at the hospital, I was told that my child was deceased. At that time, it seemed like I was in a fog. And hearing that news, God gives you this protection where you black things out. And I think it's a part of self-preservation. But later on, I found out that he was not the only victim of homicide. Another student was killed and 3 others were wounded. There were several shooters out there at college night where Tansy had stopped by and he'd let them know that he was planning on coming to Charleston. And he was shot and killed. That was the beginning of the end for me, as I thought. I came to a crossroad, one leading to divorcing myself from society and my loved ones, and choosing also not to live. The other road led toward doing something to make change and walking the walk with other warriors that have a shared pain. I chose the latter. I chose to walk that walk. And I also chose the latter to honor William Tansy Halyard. I had to reconcile how I would go beyond thoughts and prayers and take action by becoming involved with the movement. I still have my days of experiencing incredible grief, pain, and rage. Added to that is confusion with a criminal justice system that is defendant-based and not victim-based. There are also the ripple effects that people don't understand. I lost my only son. My sister and brother lost their only nephew. My daughters lost their only big brother. His daughter lost a father who will never got to see her graduate from his alma mater. The world lost the imprint I am sure he would have left on this earth. And I will continue to fight gun violence that is a health crisis in America today. I will continue until my last dying breath. That is a promise. That's not just a statement. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Hale. That's one thing that I know about you when you make that promise and declaration that you will fight continuously. I've seen that, I'm a witness to that, and I'm not so much so honored, but I am thankful that you are here by my side and that I am available to be by your side to fight in this fight with you. As we move on to our final guest and speaker, as she talks, and I smile because, as I said in the beginning, in telling my story briefly, I'll say that, as I sat there and I thought about how TV and crime stories gives you this way about of how, you get to a crime scene and you pull a cover over and you identify a body. Well, in real life, you have to wait on the coroner. Um, um, and our next guest, Mrs. Bobby Jo O'Neill, is the newly elected coroner, but she has been in the coroner's office since 1998. She's somebody that I call a friend, somebody that I appreciate so very much. When you think about a coroner, you may think one thing, but she will tell you there's a different side to this coroner life in which she lives. Thank you, Ms. O'Neill, for joining us. Share with us what you may of the experience of being a coroner and you know, statistics and some of the advice of things that you could give us as a coroner, from a coroner's perspective, as only you can give.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Keith and I usually can't make eye contact with one or both of us crying. So we're doing good at the moment that we're both holding it together. I can't promise that will continue as we go on here. We have known each other since October 26, 2016. So we've known each other for a while. I have, as Keith said, I've been in the coroner's office for over 20 years. I actually got started, I was a registered nurse and started taking care of victims of violence and sexual assault victims and caring for them. And sort of a door opened for me to move into the coroner's office, which I'll tell you here in a minute was just not a coincidence, but a calling.